afternoon and a good Erev Shabbos to you, my holy sisters and brothers. I hope it's a little better weather where you are here in LA, man. We are not accustomed to this. It is super cold for us. I know you laugh at our cold, but it's in the 40s and raining like crazy. Pouring buckets of rain. We're just not used to it. There is a drought in California, so it's certainly good to have rain. The rain in LA doesn't help that much, but I believe it's raining and snowing throughout, the mountains of California. That's what we really need, build up the snowpack in the mountains. That will help a lot. Thank you, God, for sending all this moisture. And really, it's good to thank God anytime it rains. Let's not be whiners and complainers like I just was, but thank you, God, for emptying the upper storehouse and sending the water down here. What a bracha, what a blessing. Thank you. Who's with us on a Friday afternoon? Yehuda in South Carolina, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Renee in Indiana, Joe in the Texas Hill Country. Paula says Shabbat Shalom. Nina wishing a good Shabbos to all. Joe in the Inland Empire, frosty to be sure. Belle in Texas. Already talked to and sent the blessings to our children. A good Shabbos to all. I called my dad and got my blessing after this class. I expect to get a call from my daughter and give her blessing. Paula, cold, 5 degrees this morning. That's legitimately cold, not like us complainers. Melissa, Shabbat Shalom from Great Neck. Paula says, Amen. Renee, my friends in Big Bear, B'nai Big Bear, are happy for the snow. Amen. And over there on the YouTube side, Ella says Shalom. Aoife saying Shabbat Shalom from Florida. Today's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by our own Joseph Agliata in Lowell, Massachusetts. And he's sponsoring this, I believe, for the healing of Dr. Michael Heiser, a Christian theologian who dedicated his life to teaching Christians things about Judaism. Beautiful. May Dr. Heiser have a complete and speedy recovery. And we thank him for the education that he has put out there throughout his career. I'm not familiar with his work, but it's a beautiful dedication that you made, Joseph, and may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say Amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. If you'd like to dedicate an episode of AT Daily, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Nina will put the link in the comments. Okay, we have a very colorful daf today. It's been a lot of technical stuff here in Tractate Nazir, the 17th volume of the Talmud. Now we're in chapter 5. Today beginning and completing Mishnah number 2, Mishnah number 3, and we'll stop before Mishnah number 4. But Mishnahs 2 and 3 today, here in chapter 5, which is really discussing about under what conditions does the vow of Naziris take hold when the vow was ambiguous or erroneous. So did the vow actually take hold or not? Let's light up the darkness. Or I forget. My candle's a little loose. Let's give it a bit of this, a bit of that. There we go. Okay. So we pick this up at the bottom of page 31 with Mishnah number 2 of chapter 5. Is everything in order here? I believe it is. Okay. So with regard to one who took a vow of Naziris, who then regretted his vow and stopped observing the prohibition against drinking wine, and later requested of a halachic authority to dissolve his vow, and the authority ruled that he is bound by his vow, finding no reason to dissolve it. And today we're going to be discussing some of the conditions under which you can dissolve a vow. Often it takes the form of, had you known that such and such was the case when you made your vow, would you have taken your vow? No, I never would have done it. That can be the basis for dissolving a vow. There's a lot of nuance to that. But that kind of idea, right? So this guy took a vow of Naziris, and then he realized it was going to be harder than he expected it to be. And so he said, you know what? I'm going to get my vow dissolved. I'm not going to stick with this. And before he actually gets it dissolved, he starts drinking wine again. Then he goes to the halachic authority, and he says, I'd like to dissolve my vow. And the authority in his situation says, no, there's no condition. There's no basis for dissolving your vow. So this guy violated his vow of Naziris because he thought it was going to be dissolved. So what happens to him? So he counts the term of Naziris from the time that he vowed. Right? He doesn't restart like a Nazir who becomes impure for the dead and has to restart the count of his days toward fulfilling his term of Naziris. This guy can count from the day that he vowed, including the days when he acted as though the vow were dissolved. Now, in a case where he requested of a halachic authority to dissolve his vow and the authority dissolved it, if he had an animal separated as a Nazir offering, right, an offering that you bring at the conclusion of Naziris, so that animal shall go out and graze among the flock, meaning that it seemingly, this is one of those rare cases where an animal that was consecrated, seemingly consecrated, becomes unconsecrated. Why is it unconsecrated? I'm not going to take that call. It's just our security company. So, Nina, maybe they'll call you in a moment. Okay, so he set aside animals to bring his offerings, right? This is when the temple is standing, at the conclusion of the Naziris. Then the vow was dissolved. So the animals that he set aside to be his animals that he'd bring at the end now are considered unconsecrated, right? And we said so over and over again, anything that's consecrated can't be deconsecrated. But this was a consecration made in error, right? Because he didn't know, he didn't. He thought he was a Nazir when he consecrated, and later it turned out that there was no vow, right? The vow was nullified from its inception, not cut off from the time that the authority dissolves it. So the animals returned to the flock as if they had never been consecrated. Now you know that means he didn't set an animal specifically aside to be a sin offering. Because sin offerings can't have different rules. Now, where are we? Where did I go? So those animals go out and graze among the flock. Now, on the basis of this law, and continuing their discussion in the previous Mishnah, Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, don't you now concede with regard to this case that it is an erroneous act of consecration, and yet the law is that the animals shall go out and graze among the flock, meaning that an erroneous consecration is not a consecration. That's what they were arguing about in the first Mishnah of this chapter. Beis Shammai said an erroneous consecration is a consecration. That was in the case where a guy said, well, the black bull that shall come out first of my house, right, the bull that shall come out first, which is a black bull of my house, shall be consecrated. And then a white bull came out first. So he kind of misspoke, expecting a different outcome. Beis Shammai say that white bull is consecrated. Beis Hillel say, no, that was an erroneous consecration, and so it was not consecrated. So now Beis Hillel says, see, in this case where somebody set aside animals for his Naziris, and then the Naziris vow was dissolved, right? So he set aside animals unnecessarily in error, as it were, and now the animals are considered not consecrated. They go back to the flock. So don't you concede to us that erroneous consecration is not consecration, says Beis Hillel to Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai answered to Beis Hillel, well, don't you concede with regard to one who was separating the animal tithe from his herd, passing his animals before him single file and consecrating every tenth as a tithe, that if he erred and called the 9th animal 10th, and the 10th 9th, and the 11th 10th, that each of them is consecrated, right? So what are we talking about here? So if someone is a shepherd and he owns a flock of animals, so every year the new offspring right? 1/10 of the new offspring are going to be tithed, right? In the same way that we tithe our income, and tithe literally means a tenth. So the miser, right? So the 10th animal is one out of every 10 animals is going to be tithed, right? In the same way that we tithe our money, 1/10 of the animals get tithed. How do you go do the actual process of tithing 1 out of 10? Is this process of passing under the rod, right? Under the shepherd's rod, he makes all the animals go through a narrow chute. So from them to get from one corral to another corral, they go through a chute one at a time, and he counts under his rod, and every 10th animal, he puts a mark on it, and that animal is now consecrated as a tithe. And there's a law, a special law for that procedure, that if you miscount and call the 9th animal the 10th or the 11th animal the 10th, then it too is tithed, much in the same way that we saw yesterday, right? That it was a halacha given to Moshe at Sinai that a son can use his father's offerings of Naziris in certain situations, but a daughter can't, right? And so this is another one of those halachas that we learned just like that, right? That if you miscount the 11th or the 9th animal as the 10th, it too is consecrated. And also the case of Temurah, right? That if you substitute an animal for an animal that was already consecrated, both of them become consecrated. And if you make a mistake in that process, you say that I want to substitute for my consecrated animal with my white bull, and you mean your white bull, but you say your black bull, then the black bull is consecrated even though you misspoke. That's another one of these kinds of laws. So Beis Shammai say to Beis Hillel, don't you concede that in the case of animals passing under the rod, erroneous consecration is consecration? So Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, it is not the rod of the shepherd that consecrates the animal. The touch of the rod does not consecrate the animal, nor does the fact that he said 10th by mistake. Not all errors cause the tithe to be consecrated, and the proof is like this. And what would be the law if he had erred and placed the rod on the 8th or the 12th and labeled them 10th? Do we then call the 8th animal or the 12th animal consecrated if he said the word, it is the 10th? No, that only applies to the 9th or the 11th because we have a specific tradition about that. And so the law is that the 8th or 12th animal cannot be consecrated as the tithe. Rather, why is the 9th or the 11th animal consecrated? Because there is a specific reason for this halacha. As the same verse that consecrated the 10th also consecrated the 9th and the 11th. It is a Torah edict that the consecration takes effect with regard to those two animals. Therefore, one cannot infer from this case that an erroneous act of consecration takes effect. Right? And what is the law about calling the 9th the 10th? If one was tithing his flock by releasing them from their pen one by one and erred in his counting, if he called the 8th in line or any lower number, or the 12th in line or any higher number, 10th, they are not consecrated. And this is the law regardless if he did so unwittingly or intentionally. However, if he called the 9th or the 11th, they are consecrated. And this is a halacha learned by tradition. Now, we're on 32a, and we do the Gemara on Mishnah number 2. The Gemara asks, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah when it rules that one whose request to dissolve his vow was rejected by a halachic authority counts the duration of his Naziris from the moment he took the vow? Right. So this guy who took a vow of Naziris, and then he said, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to get this dissolved. I'm not going to do this. And then he starts drinking wine. So about that case, right, our Mishnah said he's going to have to, they didn't dissolve his vow. He can count his days from the time that he took his vow. He doesn't have to restart the clock at some later date. However, as we're going to see, the days that he cheated, he's going to have to make up for, right? The days that he violated by drinking wine, he's going to have to make up for. Now, whose opinion is expressed in our Mishnah when it rules that one who's requested to dissolve his vow was rejected by halachic authority, that he counts the duration of his Naziris from the moment he took the vow, including the days on which he did not observe the laws of Naziris in practice. And the Gemara responds, it is neither the opinion of Rabbi Yosef nor that of the rabbis, meaning the majority who disagreed with Rabbi Yosef. As it is taught in a Baraisa, and we see this in the Tosefta of Nedarim 1:6, with regard to one who took a vow of Naziris and later transgressed his vow of Naziris by drinking wine. The halachic authorities do not attend to his request to dissolve his vow, nor do they let him complete his term as a Nazir by sacrificing offerings, unless he counted, meaning observed, days of the prohibitions of Naziris for the same number of days in which he behaved with permissiveness concerning the restrictions of a Nazir. Right? They're going to penalize him for taking it on himself to say, well, a halachic authority will dissolve my vow, so I'm just going to stop observing it now. No, you can't stop observing it until you get to a halachic authority and he dissolves your vow for you. So to penalize him, they said, in this case where his vow was not dissolved, that he has to make up for all the days that he drank wine while he was a Nazir. He has to count clean days against days that he transgressed. Only after he observes the prohibitions of Naziris for the number of days that his observance lapsed will a halachic authority hear his request for dissolution, right? They won't even consider his request until he's made up the days that he drank wine while he was a Nazir. That, as you can see, that's the penalty. Nor will they allow him to bring his offerings to conclude his Naziris until he makes up for the days on which he drank wine while he was a Nazir. Now, Rabbi Yosef says 30 days is enough for him. He is required to observe additional days of Naziris only if he transgressed his vow of Naziris for 30 days or more. And the Gemara elaborates, which of these opinions might correspond to that of our Mishnah? If it is that of the rabbis, it is difficult with respect to a short Naziris, meaning a 30-day Naziris. The rabbis maintain that he cannot include all the days from the time he took the vow, even if his Naziris was short. They hold that he must add days corresponding to the days that he failed to observe the laws required of a Nazir. If the opinion in our Mishnah is that of Rabbi Yosef, although he agrees that one who transgresses his vows of Naziris for a short period of less than 30 days need not add to his term, it is nevertheless difficult to reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Yosef's opinion with regard to a lengthy Naziris, as even Rabbi Yosef rules that in such a case, in other words, if he had vowed Naziris for a year and then he drank wine on 6 months of that year, Rabbi Yosef would say he only needs to add 30 days. Now, the Gemara answers, if you wish, you can say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, and if you wish, you can say it's in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And the Gemara explains, if you wish, say that the Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Yosef. Here, the Baraisa is speaking of a lengthy Naziris. There, the Mishnah is referring to a short Naziris. In other words, the Mishnah refers only to one who transgresses his vow of Naziris for less than 30 days. And if you wish, you can say that the Mishnah follows the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yosef. And you amend its wording to say, do not say that he must observe Naziris from the time that he vowed, rather say, like from the time that he vowed. Meaning, he must count his Naziris corresponding to the time that has elapsed since he took his vow, exactly as stated by the rabbis. Now, the Mishnah taught with regard to one who requested of the halachic authorities, and they dissolved the vow for him, and he had already separated an animal for a Naziris offering, it shall go out and graze among the flock. Right? So he set aside animals, you'd think they're consecrated, then the authority dissolved his vow, and the animals are now deconsecrated. They can go back into the flock. So Rabbi Yirmiyah said, from the ruling of Beis Shammai, one can learn a law with regard to the opinion of Beis Hillel. Is it not the case that Beis Shammai say that an erroneous act of consecration is considered consecration, and yet, once the matter is revealed that his vow of Naziris was not right, i.e., it has been dissolved, so the animal is considered non-sacred, and it shall go out and graze among the flock. And Rabbi Yirmiyah continues, now according to the opinion of Beis Hillel as well, even though they say that a substitution of a consecrated animal, a temura that we learned yesterday, for another performed in error is a valid substitute, this applies only when the initial consecration, i.e. the consecration of the first animal, is in effect, in which case a substitution can take place. However, in a situation where the initial consecration has been uprooted, right? The Nazir's vow was dissolved as if it had never been. A halachic authority dissolved the vow pertaining to the first consecration, so then the first animal is no longer consecrated, and therefore the substitute is also uprooted, i.e. the animal remains non-sacred. Now, the master said in the Mishnah, don't you concede with regard to one who called the ninth, meaning Beis Shammai, don't you concede with regard to one who called the ninth animal 10th, that it is consecrated, and so erroneous consecration does take hold. It was stated that Amoraim, right, the rabbis of the Gemara, engaged in a dispute concerning this point. Now, with regard to the animal tithe, Rav Nachman said, it is consecrated in the above manner only if it resulted from his error. If by mistake he called the ninth animal the 10th or the 11th animal the 10th, then that animal is consecrated as a tithe. But not from his intentional declaration. If he wanted to consecrate an animal and he said, well, the 10th is, this is the 10th, so that's the tithe, it for sure is consecrated. And here comes the 11th, and I want to consecrate it too because I'm feeling generous and a lot of gratitude to God. So rather than saying, I'll also consecrate the 11th animal, he says, and the 11th is the 10th too. So he did it on purpose. So says Rav Nachman, when you intentionally label the ninth animal 10th, you haven't done anything at all. It's only when you do it by mistake that it becomes consecrated. If the owner was aware that it was the ninth animal and he called it 10th on purpose, his consecration is ineffective, according to Rav Nachman. Rav Chisda and Rav Bar Rav Huna say his error consecrates the animal, and all the more so his intentional declaration, i.e. if he called the ninth or 11th animals 10th, in full knowledge that they were not the 10th, of course he consecrated. He intended to consecrate. Why wouldn't he have consecrated? Now Rav said to Rav Nachman, according to your opinion, that you say it is only his error that consecrates the ninth animal and not his intentional declaration, consider that Beis Shammai said the following to Beis Hillel in the Mishnah as proof that erroneous consecration is valid. Don't you concede that if he called the ninth 10th, the 10th 9th, and the 11th 10th, that all three are consecrated. And Beis Hillel were silent in the face of this question. However, according to your opinion, let Beis Hillel say to Beis Shammai, while it is correct that an erroneous act of consecration takes effect with regard to an animal tithe, one cannot learn the law of other types of consecration from there, as what is unique about the tithe is that it is not consecrated if his declaration concerning the wrong animal was intentional. Whereas other types of consecration are typically the result of a purposeful act, right? You might have spoken the wrong animal name or something, but you intended to consecrate. Here, he didn't intend to consecrate, or maybe he did, right? So since other types of consecration take effect with intent, an erroneous act of consecration is not considered consecration, at least not based on this proof. Now, Rav Shimi Bar Ashi said, this is the reason that Beis Hillel did not say that answer to Beis Shammai, as one can argue in the opposite manner, by saying that it is a kal v'chomer inference, a fortiori. If the animal tithe, which is not consecrated when he acts intentionally, is nevertheless consecrated when he acts erroneously, with regard to other types of consecration, which are consecrated intentionally, is it not all the more so that an act of erroneous consecration should render it consecrated? And the Gemara rejects this argument. And this is not so, as this kal v'chomer inference is flawed, as consecration depends on the intention of the owner, and therefore cannot apply when done in error. And by contrast, the animal tithe is not consecrated through the intention of its owner, but merely by counting, as every 10th animal is consecrated. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Here's Mishnah number 3 of chapter 5. With regard to one who took a vow of Naziris, and he went to bring his animal, which he set aside for his Nazir's offering at the conclusion of Naziris, and he discovered that the animal was stolen. And due to the need to separate an additional animal, he now regrets having taken this vow, right? Because it's expensive to be a Nazir, in the sense that you save money by not drinking wine, but you have to bring these 3 animals at the conclusion of your Nazir. So maybe he's a poor person, he can't afford that. Maybe he can barely afford the animals, and he set aside the animals to bring at the conclusion of his Naziris. But then the animals were stolen, and now he has to replace them, and that he can't afford to do. So he regrets that he took a vow of Naziris at this point. He regrets having taken his vow. If he took a vow of Naziris before his animal was stolen, he is a Nazir, as a vow cannot be dissolved as the result of a later event. But if he took a vow of Naziris after his animal was stolen, he is not a Nazir. Now, what's interesting about that is, if he took the vow after his animal was stolen, but he didn't know that it had been stolen, that's why he took the vow, then his vow will be uprooted. Halachic authority can dissolve his vow based on the fact that if he had known that his animal had already been stolen, he would not have vowed, and therefore the vow can be dissolved. Now, doesn't it sound almost the same? If he had known that his animal would be stolen, would he have vowed? No, he would not. But you can't dissolve a vow based on something that happened later. Here, the animal was stolen before he vowed. He just didn't know it. But if the animal is stolen after he took the vow, his vow can't be uprooted on the basis of an event that happened later. And this case was the error that Nachum the Mede erred in when he failed to distinguish between an event that occurred before the vow was taken and an event that occurred afterward. And the incident in question was as follows. Very interesting story. When the Nazirim were ascending from the exile to sacrifice their offerings and they found the temple destroyed, Nachum the Mede said to them, if you had known that the temple would be destroyed, would you have taken a vow of Naziris? And they said to him, certainly not, as there is no remedy for a Nazir in this case. And Nachum the Mede dissolved the vow for them. And when the matter came before the rabbis, they said, his ruling is wrong. Rather, whoever took a vow of Naziris before the temple was destroyed, like these Nazirim from the exile, he is a Nazir, as he committed no error at the time of his vow. And one cannot dissolve vows based on a situation that changed after he took the vow. However, one who stated his vow after the temple was destroyed, even if he didn't know about it, is not a Nazir, as his vow was based on an erroneous assumption. That's Mishnah number 3. Here's the Gemara. In relation to the Mishnah's statement with regard to the dissolution of a vow of Naziris due to a new situation, the Gemara cites a statement that Rabbah said. The rabbis overwhelmed Rabbi Eliezer. Right, now we have the very famous story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus versus the majority in the story of the oven of Achnai, where he was right and they were wrong, and heaven attested that Eliezer is right and they were wrong, but he was the only one, and the majority overruled him. Right? And the law follows the majority because we can't rely on heavenly voices coming down and telling us which halachic authority is right and which is wrong when they have a dispute. So in every generation, we have kind of the senior, halachic authorities in the world, and they have a consensus of what the law should be, and the majority wins, among this very elite group of the sort of the elders of the generation, the great sages of the generation. Now, so in that generation, right, Rabbi Eliezer was one of them, but the majority overwhelmed him until he retracted his ruling and established the law in accordance with their opinion. Now, to what does this particular instance refer? As we learned in a Mishnah in Tractate Nedarim on 64a, this is the idea of when can an authority uproot a vow. They may broach dissolution, right? They may suggest to the one who comes for having his vow dissolved. They may broach dissolution by asking about a new situation, i.e. a halachic authority can dissolve a vow due to a new situation that the one who took the vow did not anticipate at the time that he took his vow. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, right? So in other words, if you had known that your animal would be stolen, would you have vowed to be a Nazir? No, I would not. That would work, according to Rabbi Eliezer. But the majority overruled Rabbi Eliezer, and he was forced to concede to them. right? This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, but the rabbis prohibit this. And since Rabbi Eliezer does not disagree in the case of Naziris in this Mishnah, he must have accepted the opinion of the rabbis. And Rava said, with regard to the same issue, even though the rabbis said that they may not broach dissolution by asking about a new situation, right, a new circumstance that arose after he took the vow, nevertheless, they may broach dissolution by asking about the conditions of a new situation, i.e., with situations similar to a new situation. What are the circumstances of this type of broaching dissolution? The halachic authorities say to the Nazirim who took their vows before the destruction of the temple, if a person had come and said to you before you took your vow that the temple will be destroyed, would you have vowed? Now, although the destruction of the temple itself is a new situation, its potential occurrence existed when they vowed. And therefore, if they answered that they would not have vowed had they known this, then their vows can be dissolved. Right? The temple was not destroyed when these exiles, these Nazirim in the exile, took their vows. But the possibility that it would be destroyed certainly existed. Not only the general possibility that any building, even the Holy Temple, could be destroyed, but there had been prophecies that that building would be destroyed because of the sins of the Jewish people. And it was, the prophecy was like becoming more and more like the kettle was boiling, as it were. And so if someone had said to you, that the temple might be destroyed, or in fact, there's a prophecy that says the temple will be destroyed. If someone had said that to you and that you won't be able to bring your offerings and thus conclude your Naziris, would you have vowed to be a Nazir? Oh, no, I definitely wouldn't have. Then on that basis, you can uproot, the halachic authority can uproot his vow. Now, Rav Yosef said, if I had been there when those Nazirim arrived, I would have said the following to them in order to dissolve their vows. Isn't it written, quote, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord are these. This is Jeremiah 7:4. Very unusual construction. Why does Jeremiah say the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord are these? Like he speaks of three, the sanctuary of the Lord refers to the Holy Temple. Why does he repeat that phrase 3 times? It seems very unnecessary, right? The Bible is always terse with its language. Why does Jeremiah repeat this 3 times in the same verse? This thrice repetition of sanctuary of the Lord is referring to the first temple and the second temple, which were destined to be destroyed, leading to the third temple, which will be created when the Messiah comes, when Mashiach comes. Now, these Nazirim should have considered the possibility of the temple's destruction, and this can serve as a means of broaching the dissolution of their vows. In other words, Rav Yosef would have said to them, if someone had said to you, are you aware that there's a prophecy that the second temple will be destroyed, or that the first temple will be destroyed, and then you won't be able to bring your offerings, would you take that vow? And they would have said, no, I would not. That would be the basis to uproot. I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara responds, although they might have known that the second temple would be destroyed, as the verse speaks of 3 temples, did they know when it would be destroyed? Would they have considered that it might occur in their lifetimes, preventing them from sacrificing these offerings? Abaye said, and did they not know when? But isn't it written, 77s are decreed upon your people and upon your sacred city. Daniel 9:24. And this, obviously it's not obvious, right? But our sages look at this verse and interpret it to mean that it indicates that the second temple would be destroyed 70 sabbatical cycles, meaning 70 times 7 years, which is 490 years, after the destruction of the first temple, right? The first temple stood for... After the destruction of the first temple, exactly. So after the destruction of the first temple, there was a 70-year exile, and then the second temple stood for 420 years. So the second temple was destroyed 70 sabbatical cycles, 490 years after the destruction of the first temple. And the Gemara answers, and still, did we know on which day it would be destroyed? It was therefore impossible to use this factor as a means to broach the dissolution of their vows. So they disagree about how, to dissolve their vows, but a very competent halachic authority, it seems like, will find a way to say, had you been told, had you known that this potential existed, would you have vowed? And they could probably uproot the vow for them. But you can't say, had you known that it would happen, right? It would have been had somebody told you that this could easily happen, or that this could happen, or that this is destined to happen, then maybe they could uproot the vow in that way. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. We're going to stop there, and tomorrow we'll pick it up with Mishnah number 4. We're about, there's a few paragraphs left in page 32, but page 33 that we're going to do Motzi Shabbos, Saturday night after Shabbos ends. Wow, is it a short page? It doesn't even have a B-side, because the Vilna edition of the Talmud, as it was paginated, page 33b was entirely taken up with the commentary of the Tosafists, and so there's no Gemara or Mishnah on 33b. So tomorrow night's class should be quite short. Okay, let's see if we've got some questions or comments here on page 32. And Nina says, hang on. Okay. Joseph, am I understanding this correctly? That the Tanaim could have known when the temple would have been destroyed based on the 70 cycles of 7, the 490 years. The sages were doing a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking, right? It's very obvious after the fact that there was, kind of an indication in Daniel, right, that 77s are decreed upon your people and upon your sacred city. But how do we know that that's counted from the time that the first temple was destroyed? In retrospect, sure. And maybe even before the second temple was destroyed, someone was saying this. But they're really talking about, but they are, in a sense, they are talking about Monday morning quarterbacking when it comes to uprooting vows. Had you known, right, what would be, or had you known that conditions had already changed at the time you took your vow. Sharon, interesting that we are berating Nachum the Mede just before Purim. There you go. Purim is coming up. Adar is the month of joy, my friends. May we be blessed. May we be blessed with a month of joy that increases every day. May we realize how much we have to be grateful for and take joy in that. Among the many things I'm grateful for are my wife, Nina, my children, and this class. I am so happy to be learning with you on a regular basis, my holy sisters and brothers. And Nina's writing to me that we should, to remind you that we'll be doing our annual reading of the Megillah, the book of Esther, in English, Facebook Live on Purim Day. So that's something to look forward to.